How long will it take to heal erectile dysfunction in my case? I hear this from men every single day. Millions of men around the world are all suffering with erectile dysfunction. And even though it has a unique twist for each person, it's always because of one known factor that most people don't understand the impact of. I want to dispel this factor for you today so that you understand what's at the cause of ED and how to solve it. It actually is a systematic, vicious cycle for men, particularly young men these days. So, if it's a systematic problem, you know what that means? There's a systematic solution. I'm Dr. Trish Lee, and I help millions of men heal from erectile dysfunction by first understanding what the underlying issue is, and then secondarily, knowing what to do about it as quickly as possible. So, what we're going to do is talk about number one, what is a healthy erectile function? How does it happen? Number two, then what goes wrong to cause erectile dysfunction? And of course, number three is how long does it take to remediate or to heal that thing that just went wrong? So let's dig in. Number one, what is healthy erectile dysfunction? Most people lose sight of the fact that healthy erectile function happens in your brain first. Sexual excitation happens because there's a stimulus that takes your baseline arousal. Let's say a 5 is baseline arousal. You're just hanging out in your life. And now something happens that sexually excites your brain and it makes it so you go from a 5 to an 8 or 9. Hopefully, it's time to be with your partner in a lovely sexual experience. But what happens is it starts in the brain, which gets dopamine flowing. It's the pleasure molecule. And hopefully, you're also getting flowing serotonin for joy and oxytocin for connection. And then that begins a cascade of hormones and innervation, nerves firing down your spinal cord throughout your body. And that leads to sexual arousal at your sex organ. The vascular system's involved, blood starts flowing, and it's a brain body connection, but it starts in the brain through sexual excitation, which really gets dopamine flowing, which then ultimately it leads to testosterone flowing. There's a lot more happening, but mostly men anchor into these two things. Testosterone flowing, which then also helps with that sexual excitation. So it's brain body connection. Arousal starts in the brain. It necessitates healthy baseline arousal, 5, for you to be able to go to an 8 or a 9 in a sexual experience. So, what goes wrong? What goes wrong is that baseline arousal is changed. It's no longer at a 5. Why does this happen? It happens for a variety of reasons, but primarily because your brain is in a hyper aroused state. And that happens due to hypersexuality. And why does hypersexuality happen? Number one reason, porn consumption. So if you're a person who's had a porn habit, and especially if it's frequent, consistent, and also if it has a level of intensity, and what do I mean with intensity? Intensity is if you're getting high levels of dopamine for high levels of pleasure, what now happens is your baseline arousal is no longer at a 5. You're at an 8 or a 9. And an 8 or a 9 necessitates a 15 to become aroused. So now it's time to be with your partner. If you were at a 5, your partner would bring you to an 8 and life would be good in your sexual experience. But what happens is you're not at a 5. You're at heightened arousal because of porn, and now you need 15. But remember, your partner is only giving you an 8 or a 9. You need a 15. And that gap in arousal, your arousal gap, is the problem. So, how did the arousal gap happen? The arousal gap happened because every time you went back to porn, especially if it's coupled with masturbation, it's very high levels of stimulation. It's super normal stimulus. And what that does is it desensitizes the dopamine receptors in your brain. With that desensitization, what happens is I liken it to doing donuts in your car. So if you've ever done a donut, which actually I've only done one time on accident back in Buffalo, New York, and on an icy street. But if you've ever done a donut, what happens is you take your car out and you spin it around and around and around and around and around for pleasure. And when you're spinning your car around and around and around, what you're doing is you're wearing down the tread of the tires. So if you've ever seen a car after it's done a lot of donuts, it's worn the tire tread thin. So if your tire tread's worn thin, your tires are desensitized. They no longer have the tread to grip the road and to move you along in a healthy way. That's why porn is like donuts in the brain. Every time you go to porn and masturbation, you're desensitizing those tires, those dopamine receptors in your brain. But through the beauty and the wonder of neuroplasticity, guess what? You can resensitize those tires in your brain. Those dopamine receptors in the reward center and the reward pathways, they can be fired up again in a healthy way. So if you struggle with erectile dysfunction, you definitely can heal your brain by stopping to desensitize and starting to resensitize. So, this is why when I talk to men and they tell me their story, and of course it's unique, but it always has the same pattern. This is the pattern. I found porn when I was young and I would watch porn and masturbate. And then I still had a porn habit and I went to be with a partner and it didn't work. I couldn't get an erection. And the reason is because you're desensitizing your brain. So you can't be with your partner because your partner's an 8 on a good day because life is busy, but you're used to a stimulus that's a 10, 11, 12, 15, maybe even more every time you go back to porn and masturbation. That's why your brain can still get aroused when you view sexual acts. It's also been linked or coupled to viewing with masturbation, higher level stimulation. It's been unlinked from sexual experiences at a level 8. So the problem's systematic. The systematic piece is that it's desensitization over time that you might not have even seen coming or knew was happening within your brain. That also can affect you mentally and physically. So you might feel like you have general malaise. You may feel like you have anxiety and depression. So if you've watched other videos that tell you all the causes of erectile dysfunction, most of them are related to neurological brain dysregulation, what I'm talking about. So if you take medications, they can lower the power in your brain. If you drink alcohol or you consume illicit drugs, they change the regulation in your brain. If you have performance anxiety, it's spiking that hyperarousal. The only way that you wouldn't be impacted by porn is that if you have calibrated. So most people's brains are calibrated to be impacted in this way. So neurological dysregulation is at the core of erectile dysfunction for the vast majority of the millions of people around the world who struggle with ED. So here's the solution, your brain hack strategy for the day. Neurological dysregulation is at the core of erectile dysfunction for the vast majority of the millions of men who suffer from ED. So, if desensitization in the brain is the problem, then what's the solution? It's resensitization. And that may not be as easy as first seen. So the idea is if you're desensitizing your brain with high levels of dopamine from sexually explicit matter, then your brain hack strategy is to avoid desensitization. Now, of course, that might be easier said than done. And if you need help on that journey, I offer programs in different sizes and shapes that can support you and make sure you're successful in no longer desensitizing your brain. Now, how do you resensitize your brain? There's a few ways. I'm going to give you a couple strategies here. Number one is that dopamine is what is desensitizing your brain at very high levels, but dopamine is very important at healthy levels in the happiness trifecta. Dopamine for pleasure, serotonin for joy, and oxytocin for connection. So it's imperative to link your brain back into your life to healthy activities that provide dopamine for your brain. You can even stack those activities in something called dopamine stacking. So many people think that they have to go on a dopamine fast to be able to stay away from porn. That's kind of like ripping the band aid off because your brain craves dopamine. It actually craves dopamine at very high levels from explicit matter. But in this way, if you begin to identify activities that you like to do that are dopamine producing, then you can have a dopamine habit replacement in a healthy way while you're staying away from unhealthy sexually explicit activities. So that includes your work, especially your favorite parts, your hobbies, and your relationships. So be intentional and get engaged back in your life, all the fun, wonderful things that you could be doing instead of watching porn. That's number one. Number two is neuromodulation techniques have been found to be incredibly important in resensitizing a brain back towards the healthy, optimal brain performance pattern of calm focus. So there's two different ways that you can do that. One is with advanced technology that you can use at home. The other is without technology. Let's start there. So, one easy neuromodulation, meaning changing the way that your brain performs, technique is meditation. So, find a meditation app that you like, or just engage in sitting in quiet mindfulness, focusing on your breathing. Science shows that even 3 minutes of mindful breathing each day can provide a brain reset that will help you reset your baseline arousal. Now, for many people who have very dysregulated brains from years or decades of desensitization, this might not be enough. That's where technology comes into play. You can have a QEEG brain map performed by me if you're interested, and I can show you where the desensitization is happening in your brain and to the level of dysfunction that's there. It's called a QEEG brain map. It uses electroencephalogram technology. It doesn't do anything to you, it only reads how your brain is performing. And after that, advanced technology with a professional app that I use, it can change the way your brain performs, basically by giving your brain a workout each day, making it stronger towards that healthy brain performance pattern. So it's one of the most advanced neuromodulation techniques out there, and there's science that shows that by 2035, neuromodulation should be the primary way that we are addressing neurological challenges for people who are struggling. That's you if you suffer from erectile dysfunction. So know that advanced technology exists and that it can help you. Now for the $1,000,000 question. How long does it take to heal from erectile dysfunction? Well, it's more than just time. It's time plus techniques. Healing usually necessitates that very intentional strategies, techniques, tools, and support is provided. When you have a big issue that's comprehensive, it necessitates a comprehensive solution. So, time plus techniques. So, if you're just waiting around to heal because you've stopped desensitizing, not always is that what you need to resensitize. To resensitize is imperative to use the techniques. But in general, my programs are 4 months long on purpose because 4 months later, you should be well on your way to resensitizing your brain so you can feel and perform better. 4 months later, if you're not feeling and performing better, you're missing a piece of the puzzle. You have not addressed something that needs to be taken care of to succeed. It might be you haven't stopped desensitizing your brain. It might be you're not resensitizing your brain, but something's missing because you can succeed. And 4 months later, you usually know that you are. So please go over to drtrishlee.com. And until next time, remember, control your brain or it will control you.